Welcome everyone to this launch of a report that we've prepared, which is called Better Together, Understanding the Violence, the 2022 violence in Leicester. As you're aware, this is a report on incidents that took place in Leicester in the summer of 2022, and it was considered to be one of the largest and most alarming outbreaks of violence between Hindus and Muslims of the Indian diaspora anywhere in the UK. Today's events basically will cover how we got here, what we investigated, what we found, who the team members are, and it will basically sort of go on for the next 2.5 to 3 hours. Just by way of introduction, I'd like to thank first of all the Open Society Foundation that funded this research. I'd like to thank SOAS for being the institutional host of this research, and also the LSE, from whom our co-PI, Professor Chetan Bhatt, joined this particular study. In terms of the explanations and the introductions, here we have Professor Chetan Bhatt from the Department of Sociology at the London School of Economics, and the chair of our panel is Professor Juan Mendez, who is from the American University in Washington, D.C. This was a research that basically involved collaboration not just between SOAS and the LSE and the American University, but also third sector partners such as Suresh Grover from the Monitoring Group, one of the UK's leading anti-racist organizations, and also a large number of researchers, some of whom are here, as well as community organizers and social workers from Leicester itself. So let me first introduce you hand you over to Professor Juan Mendez. He will talk about the project in overall terms, and we will then move on to looking at the main research questions and the like. So here we have Professor. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Juan Mendez.
Well, thank you, Subir, and especially want to start by thanking the School of Oriental and Asian Studies, not only for having been the institutional home of our project, but also for hosting this event. I also want to say how honored I was to be asked to be a member of this panel, of this commission of inquiry, and to chair it, no less. It was a great honor, but now I can also say that I'm also very proud of the product that we have come up with after more than 3 years of research, analysis, investigation, and writing as carefully as we could on the findings and our recommendations. So we are presenting this report that we have called Better Together, Understanding the 2022 violence in Leicester, and we look forward to comments and analysis from you all, but also from the different communities of Leicester and in the United Kingdom more generally. We applied what we call transitional justice principles to the civil strife between communities identified by religion or self-identified by religion. And it is something that is part of the canon of human rights, internationally recognized human rights, that in the face of serious human rights violations, there are obligations that both states and communities have. First, to the truth. Second, to accountability and justice. Third, to reparations to the victims. And fourth, measures of non-repetition. And some of us add a fifth leg to it, and we call it the obligation to preserve memory. Obviously, our main task in the Commission of Inquiry applies mostly to the first of those obligations, to the truth. And particularly, we tried as much as we could to ascertain the facts, to do a careful timeline of events, to see how they link together, we try to ascertain responsibilities for preventing it and for not preventing the violence, and particularly to come up with a set of facts that are indisputable and that are not subject to mischaracterization or misinterpretation, or even worse, disinformation. We think that is a very important contribution to understanding what happened in Leicester more than 3 years ago. But more importantly, it's a contribution towards coming up with ways of preventing repetition of this violence, not only in Leicester but elsewhere. So obviously we don't deal with all of the elements of transitional justice, but we think our contribution to the truth can also be a contribution towards justice and accountability, towards reparations to the victims if that is called for, and particularly to measures of non-recurrence, measures of non-repetition. We also feel that this report makes a contribution to preserving the memory of what happened in Leicester in 2022 and how to avoid it happening again. I would very personally like to thank all the members of the Commission of Inquiry. I've learned a lot from each one of them, and I've learned not only about Leicester and its people, but I've learned also about how to conduct social science research in a rigorous and meticulous manner, so that it becomes, the truth becomes undeniable. So my first thanks is to each one of the members whose names are here on the board. But I also want to thank our researchers, our research team that actually conducted the interviews, the fact-finding on the ground, the survey by which we try to hear every voice in Leicester. They worked very hard, and they were very professional and very scientific, if I can say that word, about what we considered provable or verified and what not. I also want to thank the members of our advisory board of people who are residents in Leicester. They provided enormously helpful advice on the ground at each step of our work throughout the 3 years of research that we conducted. So if we avoided pitfalls and mistakes, we owe it very much to our advisory group and their unwavering support, but also strong and wise advice and critique of what we were doing. And so I also want to thank all of you for being here, for being interested in how we conducted our work and how we came up with this report that, as I said before, I'm very proud of having my name associated to it. But of course, we also welcome criticism, fair criticism, of course, sound criticism. We know that these tasks need to be analyzed and discussed, and particularly your comments and the comments of all the people in Leicester would make our task well worth. And again, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Juan. I'll basically take you through some of the questions with which we started thinking about the research almost 3 years ago. And then Chetan will speak about the research, the questions that were actually researched. Initially, we intended to collect data relating to demographic changes in the city and the impact that they had, if at all, on eroding so far resilient community structures and assumed practices of conviviality, practices of living together on a daily basis. We basically wanted to see if, along with the demographic changes, there had been a generational shift or not, in which those who had experience of much better intercommunal harmony, conviviality, and common struggles have receded from positions of authority in community life, ceding these positions to a new generation of community leaders who prefer to organize on the basis of exclusive religious and regional affiliations rather than across them. If you recall those days of 2022 and the coverage that the violence received in the press, there were reports that mentioned clearly Hindu or Muslim areas in the city. And they kind of suggested separation or segregation of the city along the lines of religious identity. And so we were very interested to map out the spatial profile of Leicester and its surroundings. Tracking the violence along such a map, we thought, would help the inquiry focus its investigation on why violence was concentrated in some locations and not so much in others. The monitoring group had collected anecdotal evidence during its visits at that time, as well as via informal inquiries, which had suggested that there had been a marked decline in intercommunal friendships, including those in cross-community participation in common functions that would have been not very unusual in periods before. So we wanted to examine at a granular level the breakdown of intercommunity relationships to understand the larger processes of separation within the community and the consolidation of more polarized religious and regional community identities. We also wanted to study the resilience and fragility of cross-community participation on other kinds of associations. For example, sporting clubs, football clubs, cricket clubs, those kinds of things. In addition to what I've already said about the generational angle, it was, we were being sort of told that there was no longer the authority of older members of the community who had that history and the collective memory of shared struggles in the past. And so we wanted to figure out what were the new forms of association and conviviality that the youth in this particular city, which was increasingly getting tense on communal lines, were still hanging on to or they were creating. In today's world, almost every place is affected by transnational flows of people, of ideas, social media, etc. So, to the question of communalism, which is central to our inquiry and the report, not only therefore do we, quite early on in the report define what the term communalism is, but we were very keen to map out some of these transnational flows. At the very face of it, if you looked at the visuals of the time, you could see that the slogans shouted and the actions taken in Leicester were eerily similar to the same kinds of slogans or icons or actions that were being taken on the streets of the cities in India. How do these things travel? We were very concerned to find out. And in that, we wanted to find out the role of Indian media, Indian television. All of us have apps, and we can watch Indian television on our phone screens and so on. And we wanted to also find, to the extent possible, how these forms of coverage were actually being received. And along the same lines, we were very keen to find out how social media, which has emerged worldwide as a primary means for organized flow of unverified, often unverifiable kinds of information, had functioned in this particular episode here in Leicester. So in addition to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, our team also looked at WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal, which are also increasingly prominent ways of spreading fake news and for mobilizing action. So we were interested in following up on that question as well. We were very keen also in another kind of a transnational flow over the period that we are talking about. Religious organizations and institutions across different faiths have invited preachers to their precincts, which one could, I think, best describe as hate preachers, who spew extreme hatred and violent thoughts towards members of other communities. we wanted to understand this particular phenomenon. Why are these people invited? Who invites them? Who hosts them? Who goes to their meetings? And the role that they might have in sharpening antagonisms that often lead up to violence or glorify violence that is taking place in some other location, or dehumanize other members of the community and so on. Finally, looking at local and civic and public institutions, we wanted to ask questions with respect to the role of the councillors, the mayor's office, the police, but also the role of elected politicians within national politics, members of parliament, different political parties, and their contacts with or local negotiations and bargaining with the Indian community and the Hindu and Muslim communities within Leicester and so on. So let me, this is what we started off with. Let me pass you on to Chetan Bhatt, Professor Chetan Bhatt, who has also got certain other questions that we brought into the ambit of our inquiry.
Thanks very much, Zubair. That is very much where we started from, and as we proceeded to look at in more detail at the events that had taken place in Leicester, the project structure and the research questions became elaborations and refinements of the kinds of areas that Zubair's spoken about, but also a whole range of new things started emerging. So in terms of the research design and working with our wonderful researchers, the research design was seen as an evolving process where new things arose and so on. And partly because of this, partly because the events in Leicester were unprecedented in terms of the kinds of violence that was seen. They pointed to not simply something called religious division, but a series of complex factors, complicated events that were taking place. So the project began to be envisaged not simply as a human rights, a standard human rights legally based project, though we very much took on the transitional justice and human rights legal frameworks that were there as part of the team. But also consider sort of broader issues around legal freedoms, speech and assembly, the limits of these in these kinds of tense situations, anti-discrimination obviously, but expanding from there to a sociological investigation, and by sociological I mean in the broadest possible sense. So thinking about politics, using approaches that are qualitative, quantitative, social media analysis, tracking of tweets, for example, over periods of time, using approaches from media and communication, social media analysis, political sociology, a lot of social and cultural history and so on. So the project became very much a mixed methods approach that combined depth interviews. We interviewed over 80 people, and overall we met with at least 300 people from Leicester, and we over 100 people participated in the survey, but we think 100 of the responses were robust. So the research team was based at SOAS and worked with the project coordinator. But an important aspect of the work was not simply the academic research, but to think of a community development approach that was central to and integrated within the project as a whole. And that was led by the monitoring group, and the Leicester advisory group, but we also employed a community development worker to work alongside the research team to work with schools, engage community organizations, religious organizations, and so on. And work across women's groups, youth groups, and so on. So the structure of the inquiry changed. And it comprised the inquiry itself, the panel, the research team, the Leicester advisory group, community development efforts, and so on. And all of these are reflected, all of these different aspects are reflected together with the areas that Zubair mentions in the report itself in detail. And we would urge people to read the full report. It gives a holistic picture of what happened, rather than picking out one incident or two incidents or one chapter and so on. So the key question was what happened in 2022? And for situations of violent conflict or group conflict or communal conflict, what happened is precisely the basis of the conflict. What started, what was the original point, is often the key issue of debate, division, and so on in situations of communal violence. And the interpretation of subsequent events also becomes part of the problem. It becomes part of what fuels further violence. So establishing an extremely accurate timeline, we tried to establish a timeline that was as accurate as possible. And it became clear that the timeline and the triggering events weren't just what happened in the summer, but started really from May 2022, with some very serious incident. But then there was also background events and so forth that we tracked back several years. And a second question, a very important one, is why did this happen in Leicester? What is distinctive about Leicester that caused this to happen there rather than somewhere else? And therefore also has the potential, unfortunately, to possibly spread to other areas. So this is a town that's portrayed as having peaceful community relations between South Asians and so on. A third very important aspect of the work and the research question was, what was the impact on people and on residents of the city and on families and on women, the elderly, young people and so on? What were their views? What were their feelings? What did they think the causal factors were? So that became integrated as part of the research. And then I suppose the fourth question is, how did people think this could be prevented? How did we think this kind of violence could be prevented from occurring again in the future? And these very basic questions, linked to the framework of questions that Zubair outlined, led to many, many more questions that we explored. So what did the police and city council do or fail to do during 2022? What were established religious figures doing in the course of the events that were unfolding? What was the relationship between them and newly arrived migrant populations? What was the relationship between the established community leadership, the power broking that took place between them and the city council, and young people who had, it seemed to us, hardly any relationships with the established community leadership and so on? And what was sort of refining the role of social media? How did social media and WhatsApp groups and WhatsApp messages work on the ground? How did these kinds of messaging incite and lead to violence in real life and so on? What was the role of fear, rumour cascades, fear speech? Fear speech became a very important dynamic here. And then refining further the kinds of questions Zubair mentioned, which specific militant religious organisations are involved here? Do they exist at community level? How are communal ideas spread in ordinary cultural politics on the ground? In temples, in mosques, in social events and so forth, and how are they affecting young people? And then, as important, and I think this is a strand really throughout the report, is what were the forces and the individuals who were fighting this, who refused to be separated on common grounds, had a different understanding of the history of Leicester, the struggles from the 70s onwards, to anti-racist struggles against fascist groups at that time, and a belief that they owned and had built the city and rescued it from economic decline. What were the forces that were fighting for and striving for peace and peaceful relationships between people? And then this led to examining a whole range of background factors that are outlined in the report.
Thank you, Chetan. Can I now invite our research team? Sasha is here, Sasha Patel. She's currently doing a PhD at the University of Sussex. And three of our other members are going to join us online.
Sure. Thank you all for that introduction. It's so nice to see all of you here. We've been working on this for a long time, and we've had many questions about when the report's coming out, so it's nice to finally have an answer. My colleagues behind me are, sadly in India, as Zubair mentioned, but we're going to discuss how we conducted the research. So we're going to go through our methodology, different forms of primary and secondary analysis, which has essentially led to the results that are in the report. So essentially, inquiries like ours are mainly fact-finding and reporting, and are typically guided by legal and policy frameworks often grounded in human rights. Our approach was slightly different. So we integrated legal areas, social research, academic analysis, and community engagement, as mentioned before, with the wonderful work of the advisory group who are all here, as well as our community development worker, Lisa. So we formally began our work with a letter that was sent on the 24th of May 2023 to the Mayor, the Chief Constable for the Leicestershire Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicester, as well as all the MPs in Leicester, 54 elected councillors and a wide range of community groups. So our intention was to inform them about the inquiry as well as requesting their engagement. 2 days later, coincidentally, the government announced that they would also be undertaking an inquiry on the 26th of May, 2 days after a letter was sent out. And we also had a wider press release on the 1st of June about our inquiry and its scope. So in September 2023, we held a press conference at the People Centre, which is in Leicester, where representatives of the national and local media all came, as well as other local organisations. So we wrote to the Mayor, the Chief Constable, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and all the Leicester MPs during this time, as well as several times throughout our work, informing them of our inquiry, and we also requested meetings. From May, June onwards, we started emailing community groups. 146 were contacted, as well as voluntary organisations, and we informed them about our inquiry. And slowly, as Chaithan mentioned earlier, as our work progressed, we began to identify different organisations, such as more local and regional networks, as well as subcaste groups. So eventually we had a list of 337 community groups, voluntary organisers and named community networks in Leicester. Of these, 305 were South Asian, and ultimately after this we began to email them to take part in an inquiry, either through attending our press conference. We wanted witnesses to come to our events and be part of our interviews, and later in July 2024 we also informed them about the public hearing. So a bit about numbers. Around 150 residents attended our community events. So these were held in both Leicester East and Leicester South, which in our report you will see a good map which shows the demographics in each part of Leicester, which are quite segregated. We then emailed 75 of these residents and contacted 47 other individuals during 2024. In respect to the community engagement that I mentioned, with the Leicester Advisory Group, they were amazing and provided us an incredible amount of support in terms of reaching different communities in Leicester that us as outsiders might not necessarily have immediate contact with. And they gave us a lot of advice on engagement with both groups and residents. We also later employed a community development worker, Lisa Naidu, who was based in Leicester and also helped us facilitate access to community groups and contacts. Throughout our research process, for most of 2024, the research team, as well as our project coordinator, would visit Leicester either once a week or twice a week, and we would, so that we were present on the ground to meet different individuals and groups, either for interviews or just for general chats. So we directly contacted around 180 people on the phone and email, and 81 individuals were eventually interviewed, some more than once. We also hosted community drop-in sessions. So 2 were in the Belgrave Neighbourhood Community Centre, and then 3 were in the People Centre, both at different areas of Leicester where there's a different demographic living. In July 2024, we held a public hearing where we had 8 witnesses of the events who gave us testimony about the 17th of September. We continued working with the community, attempting to have meetings with different representatives of several mosques, masjids, meetings with Federation of Muslim Organisations, the Adar Project, and Sharma Women's Centre, who are women's-based kind of secular organisations directly working with women, as well as different places like the Leicester Council of Faiths, the Highfields Community Centre, ISKCON, the Leicester Stories of Hope, and more details of this are in the report. We also began door-to-door leafleting, which was a way that we wanted to engage with the Hindu community of Belgrave. So in this time, we printed 7,000 leaflets, which were dropped door-to-door, and then later again. So that first happened in June, and then later in October. And we informed them about the inquiry. We wanted their participation. as well as their participation in the survey. And this was mainly targeted at the Hindu area in Belgrave. So I don't know if there's images on the slideshow, but in the report we can see the different bilingual surveys that we put out to the Gujarati community, as well as, across the board. So we also wanted to make people feel safe when contacting us and meeting us. So we made it very clear that they could provide us with anonymous information, as well as everything being in a designated and kind of safe zone, whether that's for them to meet us and not be recognised, or be with other individuals in a kind of calm drop-in session type thing. I'm now going to pass on to, I think, Vedika, who will continue to speak about our primary research.
Thank you so much. So I'll briefly be going over the research design that was employed by the inquiry, as well as elaborating on some of the specific methods that were used. So as has been mentioned before, that the inquiry was a fact-finding mission that integrated frameworks from diverse areas. And to reflect this, a mixed methods approach was adopted to ensure comprehensive evidence collection and to gain a rich, nuanced understanding of the events, their causes, and their impact. Progressive data collection and iterative analysis ensured that methods informed one another. For instance, findings from early interviews were used to guide the focus of the survey questions, while themes emerging from primary research were verified using documentary analysis. And this approach overall was essential due to several reasons. Firstly, combining qualitative narratives, quantitative survey findings, and documentary analysis allowed conclusions to be corroborated and reduced bias and subjectivity. Second, the disturbances affected different communities in distinct ways, and the methods helped capture these diverse perspectives. Number three, depth and breadth were balanced as qualitative methods allowed exploration of detailed individual as well as group experiences and insights, while quantitative methods provided macro level perspectives, trends, and demographic patterns. Fourth, documentary analysis enabled the inquiry to understand institutional responses and assess their effectiveness, as well as understand the gaps that existed between public perceptions and institutional accounts. Lastly, as not all individuals would have felt comfortable participating in interviews or the public hearing, alternative methods were employed. For example, written submissions to the inquiry were encouraged in multiple ways, and the use of surveys allowed participants to share their perspectives privately and anonymously, sort of ensuring inclusivity and accessibility. Overall, multiple qualitative and quantitative methods were employed, and these can broadly be divided into primary research and secondary research. And I'll quickly be going over the primary research, within which 5 main methods were used, some of which have already been discussed by Chetan and Sasha. So interviews were one of the most important data collection methods that were employed, and it was seen as one of the most suitable one to explore experiences and understandings of the topic in which the citizens had a personal stake in. And 81 in-depth interviews were conducted, and a semi-structured interviewing style was followed, where the topic guides were structured around a core set of questions to do with the experiences and impact of the 2022 events, perceptions of community relations, influence of external actors, and suggestions for reconciliation. However, the format remained flexible and allowed participants to elaborate on their experiences and their insights freely. Importantly, the topic guide was changed depending on whether the interview participant had first-hand experience of the events, whether they were in any sort of leadership position in Leicester, or if they held any sort of expert knowledge. And the majority of our participants had Indian family backgrounds, had arrived from East Africa, and could speak Gujarati, but concerted outreach and engagement efforts were undertaken to ensure a more balanced representation across gender and religion. Second, more than 25 informal meetings were conducted with political, community, and religious leaders, along with certain individuals affiliated with diverse community organizations. And most of these discussions were focused around witnessed events and community relations, roles of leaders or organizations, or to clarify doubts about the inquiry as well as the research participation. And importantly, amongst these, 2 individual meetings with youth representatives from the Daman and Diu community were conducted to discuss their perspective towards the 2022 events and understand their views towards the inquiry. Third, 2 focus groups were conducted, first at the Highfields Community Center and second at the Sri Swaminarayan Temple in Leicester. And these sessions facilitated discussions on particular incidents and community relations on certain issues like socioeconomic challenges, social tensions, institutional efforts, along with suggestions for reconciliation pathways. As a method, focus groups improved accessibility by enabling open and candid conversations within trusted community settings. However, the number of focus groups was limited as the 2022 violence was seen as a sensitive topic that could generate conflicting perspectives within community settings, within collective discussions. Fourth, an online bilingual survey in English and Gujarati was circulated, as Sasha mentioned, and this was done to hear from residents in affected areas, as well as to tackle the spread of disinformation about our inquiry that was reducing research participation. Around 22,000 flyers were distributed in Belgrade and neighboring areas, and these leaflets informed the residents about the work of the inquiry and encouraged participants to take the survey that would allow them to share their observations, experiences, and recommendations. And we collected 131 total responses, out of which only 98 were considered because they were complete. And these results indicated that more than 1 in 3 respondents were direct witnesses to the 2022 events, and they gave us some amount of description. Nearly half commented on the negative impact of the community relations, while close to 1 in 6 commented on feeling threatened due to religious or ethnic backgrounds in Leicester. And lastly, an all-day public hearing was conducted in July 2024 and provided a platform for the public to hear from the 8 witnesses, and also for participants to elaborate on their testimonies and respond to follow-up questions. This format encouraged direct public engagement with the inquiry, allowed the Commission to gather feedback from the residents in Leicester, and also ensured that witness voices were heard and documented. And now I'll be handing over to Syed to discuss aspects of the secondary research. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vedika. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see some of you that I can actually see from here, and I hope you can hear me okay. Now, I just wanted to start with just repeating what was mentioned by Sasha and Vedika and the panel, that our entire inquiry was really quite iterative in the sense that we carried out research, primary and secondary research, in a way that it supported each other and vice versa, in the sense that our focus groups, even the one that Vedika just mentioned, the one in Sri Swaminarayan Temple, it was conducted at a time that we were already kind of researching the online spikes and different tweets and the social media data in a time period that we were kind of getting ready of going forward with the secondary aspect of the research. But we thought it was quite important that we go back to primary aspect of the research as well and kind of test new questions and verify some of the claims that emerged from the research that was carried out using online tools. So I think that was one of the main focus of our research as well, that we need to triangulate as much as possible and make sure that it's essential that we check claims, understand the escalation, and understand the lived experience of people in different institutional and digital contexts. And our report as a whole supports that and understands that, and kind of it takes away from all the previous work that has been done regarding these incidents, and come up with newer research, and also counter the claims that have been made before, and also counter some of the issues that we came up with in our own timeline, because we started the research in such a way that we created our own timeline and we made sure that everything that we put up on the timeline was being verified as we went along. The things that were being matched and confirmed, we kept that. Things that did not support the research that we carried, we had to make sure that it was mentioned what the claim was made and what actually happened, and where there was hearsay and where the claim was not substantiated. So it was really important that we carry out secondary research in such a way that it supported primary research in terms of triangulation and making sure that it stands on its own. I think we also made sure that it was really important that we carried out documentary analysis of the previous materials in terms of the literature that was available about Leicester, about the ideological framework in the British Islamic context, the British Hindutva context, and also make sure that that is situated in a way that it focuses on ground in Leicester rather than looking at it from like just a global perspective. It was very important that it's comparable, but it's situated very locally. We covered many public statements, organizational communications. We looked at websites. We looked at publicly available records as part of our documentary analysis, and made sure that they were analyzed systematically and not just descriptive. We tested them as claims about reality and not just neutral reflections of it. So it became more consistent over time as we started to get our report ready for the launch. It went through multiple stages of revision, making sure that everything that we did was triangulated multiple times through multiple sources. As mentioned by my colleagues, we started interviews, we did the focus groups. Then when we saw that there were limitations in terms of participants coming towards us and signing up for certain things, we made sure that we also have something else ready. So we did some troubleshooting. We made sure that we have surveys that we had planned initially, but we wanted to roll them out later. We rolled them out earlier. So it kind of carried on in a way that made sure that we were very on point with anything that we were getting in terms of the response from the community and the response from online data sets that were available, that we made sure that it's all covered in a time frame that does not substantiate any unverified claims. As Sasha mentioned, our secondary research incorporated regular visits to Leicester. I think we went once a week minimum, sometimes twice, and we were there sometimes for extended period, attending community meetings. We held many drop-in sessions, not just in one part of the city, but many. We made sure that it reflected into the city's diversity, and made sure that it's not just done in a way that maybe alienates a group of people that may not want to come to one part of the city to the other, because we were also testing ground at this time and making sure that we're being as inclusive and as supportive to the local population. One of the major aspects of the research was analyzing social media and making sure that we understand how the claims were made and how they were localized and even like just made portable and even palatable to the people on ground, and how they were shared, that led to the events that we ended up researching. The inquiry made sure that social media was not this background commentary, but as a space that mobilization and fear could be studied and used as one of the main aspects of how things were occurring on ground. We used large data sets from, as Sabir and Chetan mentioned as well, from Twitter, from Facebook, Instagram, and using Twitter hashtags with historic search functions, and looking at close variants. Facebook data was also analyzed using different patterns and codifying it similarly as we would codify interviews and testimonies in NVivo. So the analysis kind of distinguished quite clearly the time period of the post and the period in which the data was being collected. We started with cleaning it. I mean, I don't want to go into too much of technicality and bore everyone, but it requires a lot of removal of duplicate and near duplicate material, and using, the figures presented in the report that we have actually incorporated here. We have done it like post cleaning the count, and it's not just raw straight data. And it was done deliberately to avoid overclaiming and to preserve that analytical integrity. What we were basically examining was the time series spikes around the key offline events and how they were going about. We looked at the highly active accounts during the period of the violence and what prominent accounts there were. And we also came up with like the geolocation data wherever available. We looked at the URLs of the websites that were being circulated at the time, any external sources. There were a lot of websites that we found from within the UK, a lot of them from abroad, and we looked at examining dominant words, concepts, and recurring short phrases as well. I mean, there are hashtags that you can actually read in the report, and I highly recommend you to do so. Is Hindus under attack, and things like that. So you could see that spike actually coming up and when it actually happened. So I think it was quite important that these words were used in a thematic way, and we were able to identify when they happen and how they happen and what was the frequency, and how they were localized. Similarly, you would find a lot of these YouTube videos, WhatsApp forwards of both sides, talking about when to mobilize, where to mobilize, how many shares that have happened, how many of these WhatsApp groups have how many members, and how quickly it led to the events that happened. So just to like put it simply, I think it was, rather than just guessing what the narrative was, we measured the repetition, and in moments of escalation, the repeated short phrases often matter more than long posts, and how they became viral quicker than say a long form post. So I think social media misinformation and disinformation was one of the key aspects of our research and what we ended up finding as well. The data was processed using reproducible code-based workflows. People that are familiar with Python and analysis of Twitter, they would know that there are different libraries that are incorporated. You utilize sources and materials such as bird topic, but we're really careful that computational outputs are not treated as conclusions in themselves. That's why I started with how it was really important that we carried out the research in such a way that it was done in an iterative fashion, that we're carrying out secondary research, but also not stopping our primary one, and it kind of relates one to the other, and just make sure that the triangulation happens till as late as we're writing the report. So it was done in phases, but it was not done in a phase that we just stopped, that no, we are just cutting it off now, and we're not going to carry out this part of our research. It was really important to us till the final day, till the printing, that every claim and every finding that we have has been triangulated through multiple sources, and to avoid both technological determinism and anecdotal interpretation of it as well. And obviously there are ethics and issues involved in online harm as well. So we made sure that everything was anonymized, and also our social media accounts that we were researching, they were anonymized. Ethical consideration shaped the secondary and digital analysis throughout the report. So I think I would end it with just making sure that everyone that has come to this event takes something with them, in the sense that carrying out research of this nature, as Sasha mentioned earlier as well, is so sensitive and affects community on the ground and has real life repercussions. It's really important that as academics, as researchers, when we carry out these resources as well, as a team, we make sure that we are able to utilize as many available resources. We carry out as many available methods of outreach as possible. And that outreach, that work towards the community, is what guided us and our research throughout. And we hope to return to ground in Leicester at some point and make sure that the recommendations are implemented or at least incorporated
Thank you
in
very
the
much.
years forward. Thank you, Sabir, and I'll just
Thanks
give.
to all of you. Sagar, you've not spoken at all. Would you like to contribute for a few minutes?
Oh, thank you. I think like they've covered it very well, and
Okay.
I just thank you to the community. I want to really say that all of this research that we've had is only due to the very honest conversations that people were willing to have with us, and it was done because of the community, the team that we had over there, and the trust people put into us. So I think it's really important now moving forward how we work with the community who's placed so much trust into us. So, but yeah. I just reiterate what Sasha said about community support was very essential for this.
Thank you very much. And, let's have a, round of applause for the researchers. I hope you understand the rigor and the depth with which this research was carried out, and this was done, as everyone said, over a period of 2 to 3 years. So not only are we making a claim that this is the definitive study of violence in Leicester, but also we want to make a point that standard and innovative, non-standard social scientific research methods were brought. It was also very reflexive, as all of them said. Strategies and questions changed as realities of fieldwork began to differ from our initial assumptions. And I think, given the fact that we anticipate there will be questions regarding our bias or lack of, or on one way or another, the rigor of our research methods will be one of the main ways in which we are going to be able to defend our findings. Speaking of which, let me pass you on now to back to Lisa and Sasha and Chetan. Okay. Here's a member of our international advisory panel, Lisa Maguire from New York.
Thank you, Sabir. We want to make sure that we have time for all the questions, so I think we're going to be fairly brief, but as Juan spoke, I think it underscored the importance of findings and the role of trying to set out as true an account of what happened as we could. And I think it's especially important in this case because so much of the violence was, as Chetan pointed out as he introduced the report, was furthered by and stimulated by the way it was, the narratives around what had happened already were being propagated by different voices. I think as you read the news about this report, you'll start to see certain things highlighted over other things. One of the reasons we really encourage people to read all of the findings of the report and not just in the executive summary. The report is quite a bit longer and much more detailed. It together gives you a picture that is quite complex, but also starts to make a lot of sense when you see the reaction, the formulation of a narrative about what happened, and then the next reaction, et cetera. And I think that overall, that's what the findings teach us, is that there is a bigger picture here. And then inquiring, as the research team described, into the kind of more structural grounds behind what happened, and the fact that there are policies in place around austerity and the impact on certain recent immigrant communities, as well as the longstanding role of other communities in Leicester. All of this ties together, and I think by reading the report in all of its depth, you'll get a much better sense of why those findings are so important. But I will highlight generally what our findings covered, and then Sasha's going to speak to the recommendations. We're happy to get into more detail, obviously, when we have our discussion. But I guess I want to underscore what Juan said about the importance of facts, and at the same time, debunking myths or stories about what happened that were not true. And obviously we couldn't get to the bottom of every single detail, but where we could, we did make findings. And as the research team explained, with very rigorous standards. And even as the report was drafted and versions of it were circulating among the panel and back and forth with the researchers, there were questions. I would ask, where is our support for this? Again, please, make sure that I understand where this is coming from. And those kinds of critiques and internal questioning, I think, also sharpened our analysis of the facts and our ability to put into findings those truths that we found on the ground. I wanted to particularly point to the use of specific quotations from people that were interviewed throughout the report, not just, they are not making the findings, we're finding the facts, but they are informing us of what they experienced. And I found particularly the descriptions of the impact of this violence. You think about these groups of young men in the streets, but the impact on people in their homes, the fear about going to school or about going to work, these are things that percolated through the community and have had a lasting effect. We found that the violence in the summer of 2022 was not just starting at a cricket match, which is one way it was reported, but was preceded by months of increasing tension. And we highlight this May 2022 attack on a young Muslim man, fueled by local disputes and weak enforcement of regulations, but also an animus that at least some in the community started to see this is happening and is calling it out. And then we trace that from that serious incident in May, where police investigation was not fully adequate, did not arrive at suspects or charges. And even months later, when the violence increased in September, police went back to this particular family and said, sorry, we were unable to charge anyone in this case. We couldn't identify them. And that kind of lack of accountability that Juan talked about as so important for justice and for preventing this kind of incident just didn't happen. So that was a big starting point of what we found. The institutional responses from Leicestershire Police and Leicester City Council were lacking or inconsistent. We found major gaps in intelligence, communications, lack of attention to visible and active civic leadership, and a gap between who was representing whom in the population, how that credit was self-accounted for, but also where it was missing in the youth that we, and this had been mentioned already, that we found that there was a gap, a noticeable gap of representation of youth voices, and a lot of the violence came out of that frustration with police, with the frustrations of some of the background factors that we discuss. As I said, many residents experience considerable fear and disruption to their daily life, including often a breakdown of relationships between neighbors. One of the incidents that you may have seen reported was the burning of a flag from a Hindu temple. And the reason it's so important to read the report and to understand the full context of that is that police had this was during the September violence, and the two opposing groups, let's say, the Hindus were sort of corralled in one area and the Muslims had ended up in another area that was adjacent to a temple, just by chance. But their sort of back was to it, and the Hindus were across the road. Within this group of Muslims, a small number, one or a few of his friends, got up and took down a flag from the temple. And the people in that area remonstrated that this is not what we do, this is not who we are, and they basically, exiled him from the demonstration. I think seeing that as a bigger picture of that event that was often lifted up as this is what is happening in Leicester is an important way to see the way narratives take root and also get distorted, because you're getting a slice or a moment in time, but not the whole context. So I really urge people to read in depth the chapters of the report. Social media misinformation and fear messaging played a key role in generating mistrust and hostility between groups of Hindus and Muslims, and that was, I think, fairly accurately covered and thoroughly covered by the research team. There's quite a bit of analysis there and fascinating information about where are these messages coming from and how do they then land in Leicester? What does that occasion in terms of violence down the road? And how do people align within their identities? So that even as we see that the majority of people interviewed would not be promoting this kind of division within Leicester, the narrative that predominated was a divisive narrative. How did that happen? So I think the story is there. We also, of course, made findings about external political and ideological influences that exacerbated local tensions and distorted public understanding of the unfolding events. And this included sustained disinformation by Hindu nationalist organizations in the UK and India, and by political Islamist individuals in the UK. We do define those terms in the report, and I urge you to look at those definitions and not bring your own assumptions to the table there, because we're trying to be quite careful about how we talk about different individuals, groups, and thinking in terms of action on religious grounds. We show the influence of Hindu nationalism in several key events of 2022, as well as in later narratives about the violence. The background to the violence includes serious economic and social deprivation across all communities that is especially affecting young people, as I mentioned. Just to take an example that's highlighted quite frequently in the report is the lack of social programs across in a secular way in the city that have been discontinued because of austerity programs and budgetary crises. Powerful Leicester voices aiming to forge peace and unity across communities, including the voices of many women and young people, were ignored or marginalized and need to be amplified and supported institutionally. And that's the last finding I will mention, but I do think it's worth highlighting that within the findings throughout the full report, you will see really acts of courage, acts of social solidarity, and genuine human feeling for others, where people took care of each other, where people reached out, removed people from danger, tried to calm the situation, even when it was quite violent. So this is not a story or findings about one particular group of people in Leicester causing this problem, but a series of events that link together in different ways as reactions, narratives, and then reactions again. So I would leave the findings there and turn it over to Sasha to talk about what we recommend based on our own sort of experience of doing this research and coming to these findings, but which is really just material grist for the mill in Leicester about what do we do now. And that's really in these recommendations is where this panel turns it over to the community and says, we hope these are helpful to you as you find your way forward. And we want this to be a report that is picked up and used to the extent that it can be. So.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a great and in-depth summary of the findings. So I would say firstly that I think the recommendations that we've made from our investigation are one of the most constructive parts of our report. Beyond all of the analysis and the data that we've collected, it really is like a concrete way for us all to move forward, including our recommendations that are to the City Council, police services and political leaders, as well as religious and community leaders, with the aim obviously of preventing future violence and strengthening community bonds. So I'm going to give a brief summary. Like I said, I'd really recommend looking into our in-depth recommendations, which are here in the summary, but also in our report. And they've all flown out of the findings that we found ourselves. So firstly, I think overall we really need political leadership that is clear and rejects communal and sectarian campaigning and promotes a shared civic identity. I think the notion of identity has been a very big part of how a lot of this happened, and I think looking at everyone as one cohesive group is really important. In terms of policing, community-assisted and accountable policing is incredibly important, with improved understanding of communalism, of communal dynamics, and ways for the police to respond much more fast to emerging tensions. National and local action to counter misinformation and disinformation, including digital literacy initiatives, is incredibly important, and we can see that with the national rise of the far right and the multicultural far right that is very much emerging through our times. Specifically in the UK, I think it's incredibly important for communalism itself to be understood by broader society, not only in the South Asian diaspora, but how it affects us on a local and national level. And something that kept coming out of our interviews and meeting with the local community was the effects that lack of investment in youth services, housing, education, and community has really had on the city of Leicester. And I think, echoing what Lisa said, really working with young people who may be growing up in quite communally segregated environments, for example, going to schools that may be of one predominant religion, is really important for us to move forward. And I think something that looks at more like a collaboration rather than a dialogue between two groups is incredibly important, and that being from a young age. In terms of shared spaces, I think it's really important for us to be looking at long-term rebuilding of specific civic and secular places that bring people together from across religious lines and are led by young people from across different communities, that allows people to have a sense of ownership and involvement in their community. That's a brief summary, but we go into a lot more depth in our report, so I would advise you to look at that. I'll hand over to Chetan if you have anything to add. I'm
just thinking, in the interest of time, and you've been waiting and listening very patiently, and there is a tea break scheduled for now. I think let's leave this because there are a large number of findings, detailed findings in the report, and a large number of recommendations which would be difficult to do justice to. So, but I'll be very happy, and we will be very happy to discuss them in the QAA in much greater depth.
Thanks very much. To start off, we basically have Suresh from the monitoring group and Kirk Masters, part of our Leicester advisory group. You might have heard Sasha mention the very important role they play in facilitating data collection and research and so on. So they are basically going to address this particular question: what next in Leicester? And then we will then sort of join them in a panel discussion. Please go ahead.
Hi guys, I'm Kirk Master. I'm from Leicester. I'm was working with the monitoring group and advising the monitoring group around the role the advisors could play alongside the research team in Leicester on the ground. Obviously, external people coming into a city that's quite hostile at that moment because of the circumstance and situation. We need some credible ears and eyes and known figures on the ground that could tap into the communities, that would share their expertise and their input into the shaping of what I believe in my personal capacity is an excellent report. If I could just introduce the other advisory members that are here today. You've got Naeem Razak that's here, They don't like being seen or heard too much. And you have Umesh Patel that's at the back as well. And we've got Lisa, who's not here today. She played a pivotal part on the ground as well. Just for the record, before I start as well, I know you've heard a lot about Leicester and the conflicts and the fighting and the rioting and so on and so on. Leicester is a great place, by the way. You know, and if you haven't been, come to Leicester. There are people in the room from Leicester, they can vouch for me on that. You know, it's not all doom and gloom where there's no-go areas and all of that kind of thing. So please feel free to come and visit. We've got some great people and some great food. But our part is around the what next in regards to this report, the communities moving forward, and the city as a whole. For me, I have to say, the violence wasn't a surprise. Leicester's a very young city. It's got a lot of social challenges. It's got crime. It's got poverty. It's got a lot of employment. We were hit hard with COVID. There's lots of things going on. We have a lot of transient communities, and we had a big new community. And all of these factors, I think, played its part. What was a surprise was the level of the violence, the severity of the violence. That surprised me. The framing of the violence thereafter, and then how that was used politically was frightening, actually. There was a lot of communities on the ground that were unconscious of how their involvement in some things, good and bad, was being used in a wider context, and they had no understanding about that, or they had no awareness of that. And it wasn't for a lack of community commitment on the ground. It was at a higher level, in my belief, that was stifling the efforts of grassroots organisations, credible grassroots organisations and individuals, to go and challenge some of these narratives. It was it was being designed by default to keep their organisations, their positions, and in some instances their political influences alive, which was very dangerous and very scary. And I think the report's done really well in emphasising some of that. As it starts to move forward now, I think the recommendations are a great start for the city, but I genuinely believe that the city and the communities have to socially engineer and socially design what they want next. It can't just be from those recommendations. It has to be designed by those on the ground that are going to deliver it and are going to live by it. And if we can do that, this report will give a great catalyst and offer a great platform to make those things happen. I'm excited about potentially what can happen going forward, because we have a chance, we have an opportunity to recreate this community cohesion tag that's been around since the late 90s. And for a number of different reasons, doesn't work anymore. And we've got an opportunity to explore that locally, nationally and internationally, and start to phrase that and shape that in a way that I think can have real benefit for the community as it moves forward. I've kind of categorised the what next into 3 hashtags or tags. I think ownership for the city is going to be crucial. And by the ownership, I mean ownership, not blame. If we keep looking at blame and who was at fault and who did and who didn't do and why they done and why they done or didn't do, we're not going to move forward. So we have to take ownership for some of the key drivers. I think leadership is going to be crucial as we start to move forward as well. And by leadership, I don't mean performative leadership or symbolic leadership. I want leaders that are prepared to go out and deliver on behalf of their communities, not just be symbolic in terms of brand and label. We've had enough of that, and we've proved, or it's proved through the incidents, that it didn't work. And I think most importantly, we need some safe space for some honest dialogue. If we can get some honest dialogue, there are some great people and some great communities in Leicester, more than the ones that want to divide us. Believe me, I've lived there all my life, and the people in the room that from Leicester, and even the guys that have been up to Leicester for the last 2 years, will testify. Leicester is a great place to be. It has some great people. We just need to create some platforms and some opportunities for some safe space, for some credible dialogue, facilitated correctly, and I think we can move out of this grey area of this moment where we see this divide between the Hindu and the Muslim communities. And one final thing before I pass on to Suresh. The Muslim and Hindu communities, as with other communities, have lived side by side in Leicester for decades, absolute decades, without any drama whatsoever. When people ask me, well, this was a sectarian thing where the Muslim community were going after the Hindu community and vice versa, I give them one example. That night that Lisa mentioned about the Monday that was right centre of where all the incidents were taking place, the damage that was done on that evening to that one Monday was one flag was torn down and one rock was thrown that smashed a window. If this was coordinated violence against a Hindu community, that whole temple could have been burnt to the floor. It wasn't difficult. There was 1,500, 2,000 people there that could have done it. Following on to that, if you look at the geography of that area, Melton Road, it is predominantly a Hindu area. Probably 90% of all the shops in that area belong to the Hindu community. Nothing happened to the shops. If you wanted to do damage to a particular community because of their faith, there was a number of opportunities to do that, and it didn't happen. So it wasn't driven necessarily by we're going after the Hindu community or the Hindus going, we're going after the Muslim community. There were factors involved. And that's why I think that what the panelists have said around reading the report and understanding the full context of what happened is crucial, and not just getting the snippets, because you won't get it. But the report will set that out. I'll pass over to my friend Suresh.
Thank you, Kirk. I think what I want to do is just in the next 5 or 6 minutes, just recap how we started this. Because I got involved in the first attack that took place in May, when we got the call from some young Muslim kids who'd been beaten up by a gang of 30, 40 a group of Hindus. And then as the report offers the chronology of the escalating violence, which resulted in serious public order disturbances right up to September, and the meetings that took place between large number of people, Muslim, sections of Hindu, and people of Afro-Caribbean origin, white, who live in the city. What we wanted to avoid by trying to solve this problem of communal violence was not just create a research report. And as many of you would be aware, black and brown communities are over-researched. Whenever there's a little problem, academics come from SOAS and other institutions and actually come and research. And sometimes these research reports are just left on a table to be not to be acted upon. And we wanted, through our anti-racist lens of being involved in different public inquiries on racist murders, of deaths in custody, a research investigation with all the modules that this inquiry has in its existence, an investigation which is great on thinking, but is not just thinking for the thinking's sake, but is thinking in the way Lisa put it earlier, to act. And it's not just collation of information which is not analyzed. This is information that has been actively analyzed and then coming to a process of an investigation and then coming with conclusions and recommendations. That requires a bit more than credible academics that exist in SOAS. It requires credible lawyers who had experience globally on issues to do with conflict. And it requires people who understand the issue of communalism, not just anti-racism. It requires academics who understand how communities need to be respected when they're being engaged. These are very important qualities, otherwise you're not going to get the engagement and you're not going to get the investigation. And it has to lead to something which, as Kirk has said, which is owned by people in Leicester. Otherwise, it's just an academic report, which is read by academics, but it's not going to be read by activists or by local people to affect any change. It has to be absolutely factual. One thing that we've learned in the anti-racist experience, Wadsworth was the coordinator for the Stephen Lawrence family campaign before I became the coordinator in 1993. One thing we've learned from our anti-racist experience is that policymakers, governments, have always seen black and brown people as a problem. So this issue about immigration, illegal entrance, now indefinitely to remain, we've always wanted, and through our actions, bust this myth that we are a problem, and we've always said it's racism that's a problem. And so demystifying that, debunking that has been very important. And debunking through factual evidence of what has been alleged through misinformation in social media or in evidence giving to us has been very important. And so this report, I think, is not just credible for Leicester, I think it's credible to learn lessons on a national basis, because Leicester represents, in its framework, in its demography, and its history of anti-racism in the past, and also how communities have collided with each other over a period in tribal ways. It's a microcosm of other communities that I, for example, live in Southall, which has the same kind of history. Inner city conurbations, largely working class, and new communities coming in, or even more marginalized and oppressed, etc. What has been striking for us, I think, is the engagement of people from one community, especially the Muslim community, and a section of Hindu community engaging with us. What has been challenging for us has been the attempts to castigate this inquiry as non-partial, tainted because it's somehow funded by the OSF, or because people like me, Chetan and Subir and Sasha have a record of fighting against Hindu nationalism and communalism for decades. Somehow we have an agenda which is pro-Muslim. And anti-racist or people who fought against misogyny, we're used to that kind of accusations from the state and other people. So we've been very, very careful throughout the whole process to ensure that there's integrity in this investigative process. And I think the real issues for us are what happens next. And I think it has to be a report which is used as a building block or as a tool for communities to begin to have that dialogue and move forward. What has been disappointing since the publication of the report, only yesterday, the response of the mayor of Leicester. And I say that publicly, I don't mean it in any sectarian way, but I think he says, for example, in the press that he's not had sight of this report. In fact, he and his press office have had sight of this report and the full report. Like everybody else, all the reporters have had, and his press office. And we, especially the chair of the inquiry, made strenuous efforts, countless efforts to engage with him, to give us his viewpoint and his analysis of what was happening. We sent questionnaires to him, we sent questions to him, never ever responded positively. And I think one of the key lessons is if you really want to be part of the solution to what's happening, then the attitude that the current mayor is displaying isn't going to help us. And I think our challenge is going to be how we turn Leicester as a centrifugal force or a centrifugal arena which begins to distill the problems that we have identified. And that is the rise of Hindu nationalism, the problem of Hindutva, the problem of tribal politics that played its part, and the problem of communal violence in circumstances where and in the context where there's a rise of Islamophobia, far-right politics, and divisions being developed. And can't forget that some of the things that are being said and some of the things being acted upon by people who drove that violence is exactly what the far right have been advocating in this country. And I don't mean Tommy Robinson in that sense. Remember the Home Secretary's response, who happened to be Baverman, when the explosion took place in Leicester. She castigated the idea of multiculturalism. It doesn't work. Well, her latest agenda as a reform member is that she wants to totally destroy the equality legislation. That doesn't just affect black and brown people, people of religious faith, but even women who fought so hard for equality stuff. So this is really about developing that initiative. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Three hands that I've identified. You there, you here, and the gentleman at the back.
I can't hear anything, so
I'm not from the community, nor am I an academic. I am very impressed by what I've heard this afternoon. However, there are two questions. I mean, I was shocked reading it to realise that the Henry Jackson Society was involved with the Hindu community, which in one way didn't surprise me, given who they are and what sections of the Hindu community are like. But I think somewhere, and I wonder how you can say this, given the fact, and Suresh has just said, what we are facing at the moment is a party that is growing in strength, that feels it's going to be possibly the next government, that is based on not just anti-migrant, but certainly anti-Muslim. That is how it built itself. And somewhere, and I don't know how you do this, is to look at the way that the Muslim community is viewed and the Hindu community in this country and the links that they have politically. They are not equal in terms of the way the state views them. And politically that is, and I just don't wonder how you can do that. But the second thing is, and I think, I mean, I assume it's going to be in the report, but the thing that the summary doesn't show is what the age group is of the people who are involved. Because, I was a teacher, and this doesn't surprise me, that something like this blows up in the way it does. That the idea that in fact you've got young men in particular, who are older teenagers and young adults, and getting involved is something that it has to be addressed, and how much one wants the education system to do so, given the crisis that is facing the education system, both in school and university and older. It is something that we know is almost like a cry from the heart that's not going to be heard.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from the Leicester Secular Society. You cited, on citation 128, you cited an article from the National Secular Society, the Leicester Secular Society held an event, critical of Hinduism and the caste system.
I'm going to have two questions.
Sorry,
we only have a couple of questions, no?
No, we take three questions at a time, and we go on until 4:45. Yeah.
In your full report, you cite 128 that talk about caste system.
Can you put the questions down?
Hindu Council UK emailed us, threatened us to stop the talk because they viewed it as anti-Hindu. They didn't use the term, but they were implying Hindu-phobic. And why they were using these terms? To simply silence us, to simply silence an event to raise about the caste system, especially about the views and narratives from marginalized caste groups. However, the report critiques the use of Hindu-phobia as part of a broader communal narrative, yet employs Islamophobia without similar critical examination. In the report, they emphasizes secularism and warns against communal framing. Why is one religious prejudice term treated as analytically valid while the other is framed as ideologically instrumental. How does this asymmetry align with the inquiry's stated commitment to neutrality and equal treatment of religious communities?
Thank you. We'll come back. And then let's take the third question from the back there, please.
Yes, so a few similar points to what being raised, but another issue as well. Just on the framing and the terminology, in the preamble, there's this reference to kind of Muslim and minority communities, migrant communities facing kind of like hostile environments and all the rest of it. Wouldn't it have been more inclusive to include Hindu in that? And the reason I say that is because there has in recent years been this debate in anti-racist circles to question whether Hinduphobia is a genuine term or whether it's actually instrumentalized by the far-right Hindu sort of mobilization to prevent any kind of critique of caste and other supremacist notions. And I think the Joseph Rowntree Foundation has come up clearly to say that there is no such thing as Hinduphobia in a way which we could say that there is such a thing as Islamophobia. I think that that's not really credible. And I want to give an example of this from the Bangladesh situation. The international context was highlighted in the earlier references, and this one on Bangladesh I think is quite insightful. Now, the playwright, theatre producer, Deepak Goswami, who was arguing against the kind of use of the Hindu press in India, claiming the riots in Bangladesh were anti-Hindu. He mentioned that when he was and his fellow Hindu minority in Bangladesh were pupils in schools, they would be told stories by their fellow Muslim pupils of the kind that, you see these red ants, they're the Hindu poisonous ants. The black ants are the Muslim ones. Now the point is, these kind of racist prejudices exist in communities. So why should we be denying that a Hindu can also be facing racism? And that is a real own goal. Because if we're trying to, and the second part of that is, if we're using terms like communalism in England, which is not properly understood in England. We don't use communalism to explain what happens in Northern Ireland. It's always used just for South Asia. Why can't we just call racism what it is, rather than going into all these subdivides? It doesn't really help us.
Okay, thank you. Let's have, who would like to take which part of these three questions? Anyone?
Well, I'll say one thing. I don't know if I will speak fully to the question, but I recall language in the report that does talk about the issue of how there is a resistance to discuss caste and the like, and then there is a definition of communalism in which we clarify that this is not, we are not saying something negative about civil rights activism to defend, against the kind of prejudice and discrimination that communities face. So I think that is where the language is that responds to your question precisely, but Chetan may have more to offer on that because...
Yeah, can I just try and answer all of that in one sentence? So I don't think we use the term Islamophobia in the report. We refer to anti-Muslim hatred, and we point out a number of incidents throughout this period of anti-Hindu hatred. And we make that very clear. So if you look at the full report, you'll see that. I think one of the things around the term Hinduphobia, and if you look at the data, for example, on anti-Muslim hate crime compared to anti-Hindu hate crime, you're talking about a very different situation. You're talking in terms of numbers and so forth, a very different profile. And one thing I would add just around the term Hinduphobia is, let's just step back a bit and think about where this term came from and who wants to push it and for what reasons. So if you look at RSS organisations like Insight UK, and you look at the ecology that they have established with other groups like some members of the Hindu Council UK, National Council of Hindu Temples, Henry Jackson Society, elements of the Indian media who are sympathetic to their perspective. There's a very powerful ecology there. And one of the key demands of the RSS in this country and its affiliates is to have Hinduphobia recognized in law. One of the key reasons they want that is that they do not want discussions around issues of caste. They do not want discussion around issues that shift from or move away from their particular ideology, which is Hindutva. So Hinduphobia serves a number of very important political functions for these organizations. That's why I think it's important to be very clear about actual instances of anti-Hindu hatred, violence, and so forth, and be open about those where those occur. Those need to be dealt with as any other hate crimes would be, and so on. And it's also important to recognize some of the asymmetry that comes out from our findings, which is that you had Muslim identity figures and some political Islamists spreading disinformation and so forth, but they tended to be local to Leicester or were influencers in the UK who, for their own economy or whatever reason, they wanted to push a particular political communal type of line. The Hindutva organizations not only had a far larger infrastructure, but they had the collaboration of elements of the Indian government, the Indian media, and so forth. The asymmetry was very clear in that. So
yes,
it's important to be aware of that context.
And we actually have in the report, and that sort of also goes back to the point you were making, mention of messaging on social media by certain Islamist influencers. And you could only think of what they were saying as highly objectionable, even racist kind of conversation. But I think there is a lot to be gained in terms of improving inter-community and intra-community relationships by using the term communalism, which, as you rightly say, has been absent in British political discourse. And that is because there is increasingly a replication of communal politics from India within the diaspora. And I don't think that to reduce that to racism really helps us understand the dynamic. And that is because of the fluidity of people coming one way or another, obviously of ideas because of the use of social media, the kind of repertoires of action which are increasingly similar in one place or another, slogans which are used in the streets of India as much as they are being used in the streets of Leicester and other cities, and the lack of comprehension within local authorities, police, and members of parliament, and the British press, which has an instinctive feeling that Hindus are nice people. And being someone who's come from that kind of a background, I don't deny my niceness or other people's niceness, but to also not understand the nastiness with which the current Hindutva politics is operating. So you open the newspaper and some things which have just become common, like for example any festival, Muslim festival in India, you'll find young Hindutva men shouting obscene slogans or playing exceptionally violent songs in front of them. You now see that mosques which are have become objects within anything like the Leicester Violence, where people are going around and trying to replicate that sort of thing. So I think to actually bring communalism into public discussion in the UK and not to fall back on the race vocabulary and whatever that gives us is very important in terms of understanding the dynamics within communities and why incidents like Leicester happen. Yes, please. No.
I think there was a question about what to do about the age of the perpetrators or the alleged perpetrators. I want to make sure that we understand that we heard many times that the more recent migrants, and especially the young among them, were kind of instantly blamed for most of the violence. And we didn't find specific examples where we could identify a perpetrator and that perpetrator belonged to the Damon and Dew community or whatever. In addition, we didn't want to contribute to stigmatizing more recent migrants or young people, for that matter. But there's no question that, of course, they may have been involved, or some of them may have been involved, but there's no evidence that clearly points out to a group of people as responsible for the violent acts. And what to do about it? Yes, I think we find that, as we say in the report, that there is an absence of secular, multicultural opportunities for engagement. And when we call in our recommendations for investment in that kind of places where people can feel integrated into the whole community of Leicester and not only kind of marginalized as being responsible for everything that's wrong there.
Thank you. Let's take another three. I think you were among the first ones there, and then you were second, and I don't know who's third, so I'm going to go this way and I'll say you are third. But I'll come back to you. Yes, please carry on. Do introduce yourself if you don't feel shy.
I am Arshu. I'm doing my PhD at SOAS. Two sort of related questions I want to ask. You mentioned the Islamic social media influencers and international groups who were spreading lots of communal messaging. I was wondering whether you were able to assess the impact of that ahead of the violence, or just the fact that there was this messaging. And on a similar note, you mentioned how Inside UK had led boycott sort of campaigns using your inquiry. And I was wondering what impact that had on your respondents and your sort of survey.
Okay, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deborah Hobson, co-chair of anti-racism organisation The Liberation Movement, who support of the report. I'm also a proud staff member at the monitoring group.
Okay.
Suresh touched earlier on the initial castigation of the inquiry when it was announced, and attempts to delegitimise its focus. I just want to know, were there any identifiable interference internationally from from the state or other forces, and did the researchers ever feel any sort of danger, endangerment in carrying out the work of the inquiry?
Thank you, and please.
Hi, I'm Rosie Dale. I'm actually SOAS alumni and I now work at Apollo Strategic Communications. You've mentioned in the report that the groups, the separate actors, had uneven backing, and also that the Hindu nationalist groups possessed greater backing and elements from the Indian government. I want to know what elements these are that you're referring to, and also what this means in terms of political interference, also British sovereignty, if this is, igniting social unrest within.
Thank you. So there's one question regarding Inside UK and how that might have affected your research.
What was the question?
It was Sasha, do you want to take that?
Go on the other question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sasha.
I can respond on both aspects. I guess relating to the safety of researchers and our experience on the ground. I think, as has been mentioned by both Suresh and Kirk earlier, we were victims of a very concerted and vivid campaign by the fact that a lot of Hindus in Leicester were asked to boycott our inquiry by the RSS organisation Insight UK, as well as by the Leicester-based Hindu community organisations group called HHOG. I think what was interesting is that both boycotts, there was also one asking for Muslims to boycott the government inquiry, kind of actually reflected the nature of communal divisions in the UK itself, which again reflects the cause of the unrest itself and allows us to see the communal divisions already present within the South Asian community in Leicester and in the UK. I think it's been very important in actually bringing that to light, and whilst we may not have spoken to as many individuals on, I guess, in the Hindu community, it's also very much shown us the situation that is affected by many individuals of the dominant Jew community in terms of social segregation by perhaps the pre-existing community, as well as difficulties in housing, education, in difficulties in terms of like visa and that type of security. I can pass it also.
I think that's sort of an answer to both yours and half of your question.
Yeah.
It's on the government influence in Leicester.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I think there is, specifically in relation to Leicester, from the period that I have been involved quite rigorously for the last 4 years, there are people who are reluctant to give information or use their names because they believe that Indian government influence will put them at some disadvantage by giving evidence or have repercussions on them traveling to India. There is obviously a lot of influence by the Indian government with speakers coming from far-right parties, including RSS and Bajrang Dal, and giving inflammatory speeches to organizations who I believe there is evidence participated in some of the events that took place. Is there evidence of direct smoking gun evidence of a minister speaking to a particular person in Leicester? We don't have that, okay? And I'm not going to say that exists, but I can tell you that in relation to the monitoring group that I work in and the work that we do on Gujarat, which is very heavily linked to the Leicester events, I'm the coordinator of the Daud family campaign, the British citizens who were murdered in Gujarat in 2002, and they took legal action against the then Chief Minister, called Narendra Modi, who became the Prime Minister. We have been approached by the Indian High Commission on countless times at events that take place, including meetings in Leicester or after Leicester, asking us what our business is in Leicester or at a particular meeting. The last time was when we were actually distributing information about Leicester and Indian democracy at Liberal Democratic National Conference, when we were approached by 2 individuals from the Indian High Commission who identified themselves as members of the Indian High Commission as officers, and then reported us to our management committees of our presence at the Liberal Democratic Party. So I have to tell you, there is a lot of reluctance by a large number of people to be giving their full names at events which criticize the Indian government at this time. There's a hesitancy and fear of repercussions taking place if you get involved. I think, and at that level, when you work on the Indian issue, or you work on issues of communal violence which you believe may directly have come or imported from India, especially in terms of social media, for example, in news channels, it's difficult getting people to give evidence in their real names, so it's done on an anonymous basis, so it can't be verified in the way that you want it to be verified. But that did not affect any of the evidence in relation to the violence that took place in Leicester. In fact, on a general basis.
Sorry. That's okay. There is one element that he could answer.
There's just one bit that I just wanted to point out, which is the United Kingdom Security Services produced a report which claimed to show direct relationships between BJP activists, including senior individuals in the Indian government, and overseas friends of the BJP or related activists in the UK in relationship to the events of September the 17th. Now that's a very serious allegation. Right? The second thing is that there's a separate report from the National Association of Chief Constables, I think they're called, which makes very similar allegations and talks about the direct incitement again of activists from India to the UK. I will also say one other thing, which we received a lot of submissions and a lot of information, and people told us a lot of things, including producing statements, making a number of allegations about individuals and so forth. Highly credible ones about the direct involvement of particular groups and individuals and so forth, particularly individuals within some of the events that happened. And we're not able to release that information, but there is not a smoking gun, but also no evidence of nothing, right? So we're somewhere in between. In due course, we will release this information.
Can I just add to that, which is that right after these events happened, we had statements from the Indian government and the Indian High Commission, especially after the burning of the flag in front of the temple, where they said that attacks on, that the Indian government is very concerned about attacks on Hindu places of worship, and that they expected that the British government will do something about it. I've got 3 questions. One is you, okay? One is Ed, and one is you, and then I'll come back to you in the next round, please. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Rose Mohammed. I'm representing an organisation called British Future. We're a think tank and I'm managing the British South Asian Bridges project, partly separate from response to what's happening in Leicester. It involves a network of cross-community bridges from across the country. Having recently spoken with one of our Leicester-based bridges, you mentioned that efforts to bring communities together after the riots in Leicester failed. And implicit in that, I suppose, is implying that the communities are quite happy with the situation that they're in the separatist way of living that they're in at the moment, and that status quo works for them. So then how do you incentivise these communities to want to bridge across to one another?
Thank you. Ed.
Thanks very much. Firstly, just thank you to everybody involved in producing this.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for producing this, incredibly important and rigorous report. The question I have is about the relevance, what you feel the relevance or the influence of the sort of longer-term Hindu nationalist presence or institutionalisation in Leicester is. The RSS, the HSS have had Leicester as the base in the UK for 50 years since the mid-1970s. The report covers a lot of detail about the current influence of various Hindu nationalist actors and the recent past, but I wonder about that kind of longer term influence and also how does that then relate to this narrative of Leicester as the kind of multicultural success story of the peaceful relations between communities, if it is the case that there have been sort of tensions simmering, perhaps not as sort of conspicuously as what we saw in 2022, but certainly for, certain sort of seeds of that have been present for a very, very long time.
Okay, and the third question.
Yes, so my question, I'm from SOAS, a local radio station in Leicester. We're the only one for all of Leicester. Now, we've been described by the Mayor, several MPs, by the Central Trek, the Racial Equality Centre, as the largest project in Leicester about intra-community cohesion. But we speak to a number of people, it's like a hot potato. So we merged away from a different radio station, because frankly it wasn't working. And we can count on one hand. The only people who give us any funding is Ofcom as a discretionary grant, Trek as a discretionary grant, and Kurt Masters in 2017 gave us a grant for our October 2017 Black History Month. That's the only people who have done it, because nobody wants to touch intra-community cohesion. Even though we've done things, the Boohoo scandal, we're the first people to report on it, because it's brought to us as an independent voice. The Windrush scandal, we're the first people to report on it in October 2017 through Kurt Masters' grant, was funded, and no recourse to public funding for the migrants. We're being asked to report on things in the Asian community, we've got Asian people, because we're seen as a neutral voice. But nobody wants to touch intra-community cohesion, and nobody wants to fund it. How are you going to fix that, basically?
Okay, thanks. So that's 3 questions, and we'll come back to the next round, including we'll just come back to you in the next round. Yeah. Go ahead. 3 questions. Yeah.
Can I answer a bit part of each of the questions, but it's relating to Leicester specifically. If you look at kind of the situation on the ground in the city as it is, and if you're thinking about political influence being the main driver to access resource, Leicester is split along religious lines. So you have all Muslim councillors in the Muslim areas, you have all Hindu councillors in the Hindu areas, and you have a democratic system at the minute, which is a mayoral system that has complete autonomy over the whole of the elected members anyway. And how it's been designed by default, and it can be kind of interpreted in different ways, is it works for those communities. It works for those people that are voting for their own community members. It's no coincidence that all the Muslim councillors are being elected by the Muslim community, and it's no coincidence that all the Hindu councillors are being elected by the Hindu community. It's how do you change that? You heard earlier from, I think it was SOAS or somebody else on the panel, the lack of engagement from the top. And if I just take the political situation, the mayor is the top of the political situation in the city, and he doesn't want to engage in this conversation about connecting societies or bringing community groups together or having harmonious relations and whatever. Where do you go? And it's up to the communities now. From yesterday when that report came out, the one common thing that came back through my networks, on the phone and wherever else was, is nobody would not have said that the mayor has failed, the politics has failed, the police have failed. What they all said was, thank God somebody has said it. That was the common thing that came back, I kid you not. Thank God somebody independently has said that they've all failed through this. Because they're too scared even on the ground to say it, through fear of losing a small grant or their position or their ID badge or whatever it is. So the communities really need to say, what do we stand for? What do we want as a city? Do we want sectarian politics? Do we want separate communities? Do we want a dual carriageway that divides our community? If you do, carry on doing what you're doing in Leicester. If you don't and you want change, you need to start owning it. The communities need to start calling out their leaders, religious leaders, community leaders, political leaders, and those at the top, and say, we're not happy with this. We want change. And it has to come, that's why I mentioned it earlier, it has to come from the bottom up. These just help. But the one common thing, I kid you not, that came out from yesterday was, thank God somebody has called it out. Because locally, they won't. That's the problem.
I want to just add on a little bit to this, which goes in a slightly different direction and is sort of the general sense that was obtained from all of the testimonies and conversations that our researchers had was, this is not a city where people are saying, yes, we don't want to talk to the other, you know. This is where people are concerned about the division, and but what we saw and what's related and described very well in the full report, and I can't do it justice here, is how the voices of division took control and in a way silenced or made crossing that line to a more unified voice that much more difficult for anyone who is a member of that community, even not sharing those views. I think that's a fair thing to say about what the report outlines, but it's, again, as we said, sort of understanding how that comes about, what are those forces of division, and how do you never silence, I think those voices will be there, but how do you find a way to create that safe space you're talking about, where people who do want to come together can have that conversation and talk about what their goals are in that direction.
Okay, so now we're coming to the last set of questions. There are two questions here.
Yeah.
There is one question there with the gentleman who has raised his left hand, it's two fingers. Yeah,
mine is Leicester Violence, and I'm actually from Leicester originally. Came here in 1966, grew up in Leicester. Moved to London, but half my family, more than half my family, still lives in Leicester. I'm currently the national president of Indian Workers Association Great Britain. My religion originally was Sikh. And the first thing that I picked up from this report was there's no mention of the Sikh community, Punjabi community, which is one of the most established communities from both East and West Pakistan, or West Punjab, I should say, East and West Punjab, who are living in Leicester, who've been living in Leicester together without any issues. And that's number one. I mean, there's probably good reason why it's not mentioned, but it's quite a predominant and large community that, by and large, stayed on the sidelines when this was going on. And why that happened again is a different question, because this was happening in Leicester East and Leicester South. Areas, both the areas where it happened were rundown areas, deprived areas, where the temples are, and we've got a huge Sikh temple there as well. And probably have the largest concentration of mosques. And again, I think in the report, I only read this, sorry, do forgive me, I read the summary only. It does mention they were actually called Pakistani Muslims. When I say if you look at the Muslim community, you probably find a large number are actually from Bengal, Bangladesh. And so you've got Gujarati Muslims, and you've got Bengali Muslims. And yes, there'll be some Pakistani, but there are Indian and Bengali Muslims. So again, I don't know, because I'd love to read the full report, which I think we will get access to. So my question, sorry, I should come to that. My question is, I'm a little bit concerned about the language, and I don't really want to understand what we mean by it here. I think what Professor Mendes has said is absolutely spot on. It really hits me, secular multicultural activities. But when we're saying that actually there's a problem to internalize or operationalize the recommendations, we have to use socially engineered or socially designed. There are two concepts that really concern me. What do we actually mean by that? Because I think, Kirk, you used that, and I thought, oh, I don't know what you mean by this, because that is a sort of language that people want to ghettoize or control us. And I think that's very, very good. And I will admit, like everybody has said, no, I think there is a big breakdown between the youth and the existing established leadership. That's not just in Leicester. That is happening everywhere. I'm from South Coast, Rach is there, we work there, and we see the same dangers there. With unemployment, 14% of young people, what sort of summer are we going into? But these are key questions. I really want to thank you for bringing this report out. I think it's a fabulous report, and I really look forward to seeing and reading the full report in due course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course, it is available for free download.
Yeah, so I understand.
Please. And if you keep your questions brief, then we'll be very much
very quickly. My name is Arati Banerjee, and I'm a member of Richard III Society, which is based in Leicester. So this is something different. But I wanted to also talk about mainly my concern from what I've gathered here about the caste. Now, I was born in India before partition. I'm a daughter of the British Raj, and I'm proud of it. So we can have another conference on that. But caste is such that I am asked here by white men, what is my effing caste? So the men have to stop doing that. The white people have to stop doing that. That's the first thing. They were ruling over us. They should have fixed it. They maintained a military presence for 300 years, and now they come, when we are here, they're blaming us. The other lot are the Muslim Raj, which has been there since 700 AD approximately. They practice caste. They ask me, the few that I've met here, say they are very proud to be Brahmins from Kashmir. So I'm told elsewhere that only the suffering untouchables became Muslim. But here I'm told that the Brahmins from Kashmir are all Muslim. So it is not just a Hindu problem. So the Muslim Raj and the Protestant Christian Raj have perpetuated it. And I do mind that for the Hindus to be blamed. There is a group I'm connected to, which is Dalit Solidarity Network. I think they're with the United Nations. One of them should have been here.
Yes.
That's one. And the other is that there was a conference. There will be a conference around now in Zurich about caste. And I think the feedback from there would be of great help and interest to me. I'm bringing up caste because also in the House of Lords, and the question is, why is Britain allowed in this parliamentary debate, whether it's the House of Commons or the House of Lords, they did not allow a legislative measure to be taken against practice of caste in Britain. They did not allow it, although the Dalit community here presented a resolution. They denied it because of division. So who is dividing who? It's not Hindu Muslims, it's the Raj in every place.
Okay, thanks very much. And is that
Thank you. A few years ago, there was unrest in Slough between different Asian groups, and it was established that there were some business interests who were behind those tensions. Is there any evidence that there were business interests in Leicester who were behind the tensions there? Okay. Secondly, there's been some concern about certain Hindutva organizations like the VHP using charity fundraising for political purposes. Have you made any recommendations about this kind of political fundraising, which is overt, has overt consequences? It's often called far right. The term far right is often used to refer to people who are slightly right of the Conservative Party. Would you or would you not categorize Hindutva organizations like the VHP, RSS, as far right, crypto-fascist or not? Bearing in mind that the BJP was created in the diaspora, in Britain and America, and is still carrying on that basis. Lastly, I'm not in the least bit surprised about police inaction in Leicester, because the road to that was paved in Lozells in 2003, where somebody was actually killed as a result of communal violence, but nothing was done. There was a radio broadcast which said,
again, can I just request you to keep it brief?
These were the words used, let's hope some Asian girls are having their throats slit as we speak. Nobody was prosecuted for that. No action was taken, so it does not surprise me at all that nothing happened in Leicester after those disturbances.
In the spirit of generosity, we'll take a fourth question.
Thank you. Just a very quick question. The city boundaries for Leicester are going to be redrawn soon, and it's going to be the Greater Leicester urban area under the devolution, which is going to change the political dynamic of the city, with a lot more of the white urban, the white people are an ethnic minority in Leicester at the moment. The urban area is going to change and the political dynamic is going to change. What message do you want those people to hear, and other communities, the East European, the West African communities, the East Asian communities, that aren't discussed in this but are directly affected by it?
Let's keep our answers brief as we are sort of approaching the end of the booking for this room, but who would like to take this question?
What did he ask?
You have to tell Suresh the question, he can't hear. No, I was just telling them. I'll take the boundary review one. Yes. I think it's an absolutely crucial question in the grand scheme of what's going on, because obviously the demographics of the city and the geography is going to change massively, north and south. Obviously right now the Leicestershire County Council has a reform authority. Could that creep into some of the city boundaries? Potentially. So it is going to change the political landscape. Through the kind of devolution, we do lose the mayoral system, which could provide other opportunities or present other opportunities to the community as well. I think, again, it comes back, again, just touching on your point around socially designed. It is a term, but basically it's how communities want to reshape all of this. 2027 is the local elections in Leicester. They've got 12 months to sort themselves out. And it's the community that needs to do it bottom up. They have the influence, they have the power. It's just now having the belief and the trust to be able to say, we can go and do this. But if they don't, you're just going to get more of the same, unfortunately.
Okay, Chetan, you want to address some part of the question? Who wants to go? Suresh? Yeah, let's try to do
Just to cut, or very quickly, business interests. You asked a question about business interests. Just read the report. There's evidence of certain businesses in certain industries that have a hyper-exploited workforce, sometimes being paid below the minimum wage, who are seen as political fodder. Yeah. And we've got, there's evidence of that in the report that shows how it links to particular political parties as well. in terms of RSS VHP fundraising, RSS VHP, there's ample evidence of that, and there's reports that have been done in the past on that, which some of us were involved in. There's one other point, which is, I think, a very important one. People talk about the RSS and the RSS from India and so forth. A very important dynamic in India is non-RSS Hindutva organizations. There's a long history of them, starting all the way back from the moment that the term Hindutva was enunciated in 1923. There's a lineage of different organizations, and there are proliferation of different currents within Hindutva since 2016, right? Now, those are as important in many ways in terms of some of the street-level violence that we saw in Leicester as formerly the RSS organisation. So you're seeing for the first time in Britain non-RSS-related Hindutva organising, which is critical. And you know, I mean, the short answer is, yeah, this is bleak for the future. One thing I would just like to say is that we've been talking about Hindu-Muslim, and so forth. We're already in the logic of communalism if we do that. When we started this research, we had to be very careful even around the terms that we used. And if you start talking in those terms, you immediately think of the Hindu community, the Muslim community. Well, actually, we met a fair number of Hindu religious leaders who didn't want to necessarily be public, Hindu congregations who are opposed to Hindutva, but are too frightened to say this. And it's important that homogeneity and that we don't fall into the logic of communal thinking, and then think about other kinds of spaces that people across the board, in terms of the people that we met and interviewed, talking about in terms of shared spaces. So, and this is really, we're talking about some organizations that have become dominant within the infrastructures, and the way that the local authority and other institutions have embedded communal logics within the way they treat communities, work with them, fund them, and so on. Right? That's something that has to be changed. Yeah.
And on your question on the far right, etc., I mean, any politics that considers some other people as less than human and basically as worthy of exclusion and also worthy of the exercise of violence to achieve that kind of exclusion, I would define that as, you know, quite central to the far right. And by that definition, Hindutva, many forms of Islamist extremism, many forms of Christian, extremism, obviously the racial right, the racial politics that we see here have that in common. And I would personally, not that is what the report is about, I would not necessarily have any problem thinking of that as politics of the far right with only certain distinctions regarding, who is the primary people and who are there and this kind of thing.
And I would just add, and this isn't the view of the panel necessarily, but I have no problems calling the RSS fascist. Yeah, that's what it is.
So can I now welcome our SOAS director, Adam Habib, for the closing remarks along with Professor Juan Mendes. Thanks very much, Adam. We all know that you're very busy.
So my name's Adam Habib. I'm the Vice Chancellor of SOAS. And of course, I'm meant to do a few concluding remarks. Vice Chancellors just get rolled up at the end of the event to say a few polite things. What I thought I'd do is not give you a long reflection of the report. You've heard about the report from the people who authored the report. They're far more qualified to do so. What I did think about saying is that this report in many ways is a manifestation of universities at the best. If you look at universities today, we come in for a hiding from everyone. And everyone's critical of universities. But what this report and what universities are really meant to do is assist people to train people and to enable social mobility in the society, to create a new generation of professionals in all of the disciplines that we are. But it's also meant to do research that makes a difference. And the only way you make a difference is by tackling a challenge within the society, getting the skills of your academics to first itemize what happened, to then understand what happened, and then to make a series of recommendations. And in a sense, this report, by bringing intellectuals, looking at a social problem, and trying to understand why it happened, and then making a series of recommendations that stakeholders can tackle, is exactly what universities should be about. And universities should be less about themselves and completely focused on their money and this thing, and the fact that SOAS came together with the LSE, it came together with colleagues in another part of the world, in the US, and worked together with anti-racist organizations and other civics expressions. That's what universities are at the best. And the fact that we could pull that together with our partners is a testimony that we can get to work and get universities to do what they're meant to do. So, if you like, that's my official line from the Vice-Chancellorship. But I can't resist two remarks on the report. And I say this because I raised both issues. One was I raised early on with Subir. And the second I raised as a comment of democracy is from the bottom up. And if we don't fix this, it has to be fixed from the bottom up. Let me say about violence. I think that the report makes a series of very valuable recommendations on holding the mayor accountable, on holding politicians and the police accountable. I think it makes a set of valuable recommendations on setting up intercultural groups and intercultural conversations. I think all of that. It makes a huge recommendation around dealing with the economic deprivation in the society, because that creates the social conditions around which people become desperate. So all of those things are important. But I do think that the one thing that we have to do, and that progressive intellectuals struggle with, is today we need to throw the book at violence. When violence raises its head, when political leaders refuse and preach hatred, when people are actually involved in acts of violence, if you don't act decisively against it, you let it fester. You let it resurface. And so the real fundamental question that I do want to underscore is that you actually have to respond to violence very firmly, and you need to take it on. And that doesn't mean you have to be brutal. It doesn't mean that by any means. But if progressives do not learn to say what policing should be in the short term, not in the long term, but how do you deal with it when somebody is violent, you only allow the right to determine what policing is about. And it's time that liberals and progressives start taking seriously how you deal with violence and how you manage it. And so that's the first thing that I think it could have dealt with in more detail. Not in the medium term about training people better, that's important. But in the short term, when somebody is violent, how do you react? How do you move? And how do you apply the rules equally to all? That it doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or Hindu or white or black. If you are violent, it's the conduct that should get some action. So that's the first thing I want to put on the table. The second is, how do you get polarized societies out of their polarization? That's the fundamental question. So when you say, correctly I think, that the political leadership and the political choices are choice of the democratic choices of our communities. But communities have agency, but they do not have unconstrained agency. They act within political constructs. They vote within political frameworks. They all vote between choices of political leaders. And one of the things that is coming out is our governance structures in Leicester have codified communalism. They've codified it. So if you need to break it, it can't simply come up from the ground. It has to be come up with an intervention, come from the ground, but you have to create alternative voices. You have to create alternative political voices that say it is not in the interest of all of us to have communal logics. That it is in the interest of all of us to break through archaic identitarian politics. And if you don't do that, we all lose. And our politicians need to do that, but also political voices in the community need to articulate that. We have both in Leicester and around the world, become prisoners of logics, of political logics that are chauvinist. Our political leaders, our religious leaders can be chauvinists. But when you speak to the vast majority of people, they're not. They respond to that. They're forced to respond to that. And so we really need to think through how we create alternative logics. How do we create alternative political voices? How do we create alternative civic expressions? And most importantly, how do we create alternative governance structures that don't codify communalism, but prioritize the kinds of values that starts with us all being human, and that says that the only way out is when we start with us all being human. Because I'll tell you this, and this is for Leicester and anybody else, if we're going to start settling scores of our past, from whatever communities we come from, we'll destroy the human community. We have no future. The only possibility is when we start thinking ourselves and building bridges between communities. And it seems to me that's where the possibility is. And I want to end with this. Somebody said that the Leicester boundaries are being redesigned. There is nothing more powerful than reorganizing boundaries in ways that force people to talk to each other, that force people to engage each other, that force people to live with each other. You know, when you come to a place like SOAS, it's quite, we have many other challenges, I can tell you. But one of the challenges we don't struggle with is intercommunal. That's not because we're brilliant or we're bad. It's because the environment nurtures it in its own way. And that's the fundamental thing that it seems to me we need to think through, is how do we break out of the logic of a communal politics that has made it natural for communities to behave in it. You have to actually create an alternative politics that make it unnatural to go the communal route, but make it logical to go for a route that brings us together. And it seems to me that's the conversation that needs to happen. I'll stop there. I'll say thank you to all of you for coming. This is meant to be bringing our intellectual capital in all of its complexity into the public policy challenges of our time. And whether you agree with the report 100% or not, what this process has done is enable that. And I want to thank all our partners, all of our scholars, and all of our students who've been involved in that.
Just some final remarks from Professor Juan Mendez before we all depart.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank again the School of Oriental and Asian Studies for being the institutional home of this inquiry, but also for inviting us today to launch our report. And it's very appropriate and actually exciting to hear Professor Habib say that our report is an example of universities at their best. In fact, coming from a school with the very well-earned prestige for scientific rigor and educational and academic excellence as SOAS, that is a great compliment that we don't know if we deserve, but we really take it. And I do so on behalf of the whole inquiry teams that we already mentioned. I also think it's very appropriate to focus on the rejection of violence, because this is what the report is about. It's looking at the violence, but also in no uncertain terms condemning it and trying to prevent it from happening in the future. Because it is based on the internationally recognized human rights canon, it is also a report about discrimination and about the absolute prohibition of both racial and religious discrimination. And we point in this report to the need to enforce both the prohibition of violence and the prohibition of discrimination. We are also very encouraged by the initial response. Of course, it's only 24 hours since we published the report, and maybe too early to tell. But as Kirk was saying, the response on the ground is very encouraging to us. The fact that people think we have produced a product that is worth analyzing and debating and taking on to policy conclusions and determinations and action is all that we would have expected to. We're also not surprised that there are some initial criticism. Some of it sounds and reads very boilerplate, quite frankly. It's the same kind of attacks that we received when we first said that we were going to do a study, that we were not independent, that we were funded by open society, which we of course admit. We don't agree that being funded by open society foundations is any sign of lack of independence. On the contrary, we have said over and over again that we would never accept this task if we were told what to say and what not to say. We took this task on with the premise that we would let the facts guide us, and we have lived up to that standard, and the report shows that. I myself was attacked as being anti-Indian, when in fact I've never worked on India, I've never been to India, and if it has anything to do with my task as a UN Special Rapporteur on torture, all I can say is that every year I was a Special Rapporteur, I asked the government of India to invite me because they had an open-ended invitation to all Special Rapporteurs, and I never once got an invitation to go to India. So that I don't think qualifies me as being anti-Indian in any way. But it is. But I want to say that this boilerplate kind of attacks don't surprise us and don't prove us wrong in any way. But I think it's important that we continue to focus on the use of this report for the task of rebuilding intercommunal, interreligious relations in a place that has been the model of coexistence and harmonious coexistence until only a few years ago. We think that obviously is the task of Leicester-based people, and there I think we don't mean only Hindus or Muslims, but we also mean all the members of the communities in Leicester and of the whole Leicester and neighboring cities, communities as well. We hope that this report that we're publishing today is a step in that direction, and particularly is helpful to those people who we know are there, and you all know are there, who are willing and able to take on this task of rebuilding peaceful and harmonious relations between communities in Leicester. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and can I just say, so thanks very much, and I know some of you have been sitting here for 3 hours, so now it's time for you to stretch your legs, and do read both the executive summary and, if you have the time and inclination, the full summary, and do pass it on to people who you think might have something constructive to do with these things in terms of the findings and the recommendations. While specific to Leicester, we think that this might have relevance well beyond Leicester. Thanks once again.